Good evening. In a socially distanced world, Design United is an optimistic digital platform for collaborative design and connection. In a socially distanced world, Design United is an optimistic digital platform for collaborative design and connection. Design United was created in March 2020 during a period of intense lockdown and quarantine measures within the region. The aim behind Design United was to create an optimistic space for regional dialogue, connections, collaborations, and opportunities for young regional designers and design practices. A much-needed network of support and peer mentorship during these uncertain times. Talented young designers and design studios working on design innovation with an approach that is relevant to our South Asian region have been invited to be a part of the platform. We also encourage design students from the region to share their work, be involved in the dialogue, and to be an active part of Design United. Design United, most of all, believes in creating a community of designers and design knowledge that is largely contextual, with focus on contributing to the environment and our community. Design United believes greatly in a spirit of collaboration and idea exchange. Welcome to Design United's 15th Design Conversation, a very special conversation with two inspirational Indian architecture studios, Hundredhands and Studio Made. Mentorship and constructive criticism is an essential aspect for the growth of designers and design practices. Design United started this exciting mentorship series, Design Practice, and we're very happy to have three inspirational designers and mentors sharing their experiences and their design journeys with us today. Architects Sunitha Kondur and Bijoy Ramachandran from Hundredhands, Bengaluru, and architect Madhusudhan Chalasani from Studio Made, Hyderabad. I'm Varna Shashidhar, founder principal of a regional landscape practice, VSLA, based in Bengaluru. I'm supported by Clayworks Spaces in this endeavor. Clayworks creates flexible co-work spaces that focus on productivity and sustainability. They've currently come up with a new product which provides an overall work from home innovative solution. I'm also supported by my wonderful Design United team in this endeavor. The aim behind Design United is to create an optimistic space for regional dialogue, connections, collaborations, and opportunities for young designers and design practices. A much needed network of support and mentorship during these uncertain times. Design Conversation has featured talented emergent designers from our own region, India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, selected for their innovative approaches and practices that have a deep resonance with the place they are from. These young designers genuinely believe in contributing to the community and the environment through their design. So please continue to join us every week on Saturdays, same time at 4:30 p.m. for the conversation. With this background to Design United, let's move to the much anticipated presentation and conversation for this evening. It's indeed a privilege to introduce and to welcome our inspiring presenting designers and mentors, architect Sunitha Kondur and architect Bijoy Ramachandran from Hundredhands, and architect Madhusudhan Chalasani from Studio Made. Hundredhands was founded by architects Sunitha and Bijoy in the year 2003. Their studio seeks to identify appropriate metaphors for the particular exigencies of the project and is grounded in their search for contextually appropriate solutions. They describe their practice as a recognition of what exists and can lead to a more speculation of what can be. Both Sunitha and Bijoy have bachelor's degrees from BMS College of Architecture, Bengaluru, and master's degrees from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where Sunitha has been a recipient of the Aga Khan Travel Scholarship and the MIT Council for Arts grant. Bijoy is invested in pedagogy and is on the board of studies for 3 regional colleges. Both have extensive experience in design and management of large-scale housing and institutional projects. Their recent projects have been Bangalore International Center, IRA School, Neve Primary School. Personally, I've had the fortunate privilege of collaborating with Hundredhands, Sunitha and Bijoy, and I must say they've been wonderful collaborators and mentors. Welcome, Sunitha and Bijoy. Design practice also focuses on emphasizing the diversity of approaches to design and journeys of inspiring regional designers. Our second featured studio today is Studio Made, and it's a pleasure to introduce architect Madhusudhan Chalasani, the founder principal of Studio Made, a practice that primarily focuses on international competitions and self-originated projects that engage in the public realm. Architect Madhusudhan Chalasani worked with Professor B.V. Doshi at Sangat after his master's degree and worked with renowned architects Rafael Maneo in Boston and Madrid, also with Mansilla and Tunon in Madrid, before returning to India and establishing Studio Made in the year 2007. Studio Made has won several international awards, including the Holcim Award for Sustainable Construction and the European Center for Architecture Awards 2014. The studio's work reflects the hybrid character of its team, drawn from across India and Spain. The studio is based in Hyderabad and is currently working on an art museum in Sancheon City, South Korea, which they won through an international competition. We're thrilled to have you join us today, Madhu. Welcome to our presenting designers for today, Sunitha, Bijoy, and Madhu. We will start the presentation with architect Madhusudan Chalasani sharing his journey with his practice, Studio Made. Thank you.
Thank you for having me over. I don't know whether I should be focusing more on the work or the circumstances that has led to me working on these kind of projects and finding my own way of working. So to begin with, I'll just quickly run through a small presentation I put together of the projects we have been doing for the last 5 to 6 years. Yeah, next. So these are the wonderful, collaborators I had over the period of time. Some of them continue to work with us. Next. So rather than looking at project individually, I thought that I should try and find out whether there is any pattern in our work in terms of in the ideas we have been pursuing over a period of time. And then I just came out with these kind of things, which seems to be the recurring theme in all our projects. Every project for us is, to begin with, is an independent of the context. It's important for us to have a conceptual construct of the project, which is independent of the context. So the whole design exercise is about how do you formulate the conceptual first, and then how do you contextualize to a given situation at a later date. And then in every project, we try to see if whatever is our intervention, whether it's in an urban context or in a suburban context, whether it reflects some of the memory of the place. And for us personally, it's been very important to pursue architecture which doesn't have a definitive form to begin with. It's more about creating space rather than creating a style or a language for itself. So most of our projects are neutral in the sense, as Ayush was mentioning earlier, they are function neutral. It's important, because I've always been fascinated by traditional buildings, which seems to have outlived the function, and then still they seems to create that visual impact and the spatial impact without having any direct reference to the, more often than not, the redundancy of the initial function. and something which I thought that modern architecture always lacked. And modern architecture seems to be so driven by the function that once the redundancy sets in over a period of time, the building loses its significance. So for us, that's also one of the and then another aspect we continuously strive in every project is much beyond the functional requirements or the programmatic requirements. What is that the project gives back to the community in which it is situated? Whether is it possible, whether can it provide a new public space, whether it can give some kind of an access to the larger population much beyond the users of the building. And another aspect which I thought was continuously like prevailing in all our project was movement as a generator of the form itself. So initially you decide the flow of the people, you decide the linkages in the site, and then the actually volumetry follows it. So the generator becomes not the function, but the how you envisage people moving through them. And last, but we feel it's the most important aspect of it is the impermanence. By impermanence, I feel we mean that there is going to be some kind of a redundancy of usage, say over every 5 years or 10 years. But when you are conceiving buildings, public buildings, which will last for say like 50, 100 years or even more, how do you design those buildings which do not have any kind of a permanent function assigned to it? So these are like broadly these are the principles if someone has to classify them as the principles of our work. So now I'll run through the projects without talking too much through the projects, because I'm sure all of you would have seen these projects. And if you're interested, people can go back and check it on the website in more elaborately. But I just want you people to look at these projects, look at these principles, and see how much is captured in these projects. In some cases all, in some cases a few. We'll just quickly run through the projects. Next. This was actually a brick decommissioned kiln in Porto, which they wanted to repurpose it. So they said, program, you can assign any program to the project, you can do whatever you want. But you like, the idea is to maintain some kind of a situational position the existing structure has over the entire territory, and then see what kind of a function can be. So we decided to completely clean it up and make it into some kind of a playground with the galleries surrounding, which are like existing walls of brick lane are used as galleries, and the rest of it is just a public space. I think this also captures the essence of it. So basically we are creating something like a Maidan, which can transform, take different kind of functions through the day, through the week, through the year. The only defined part is we just don't want to touch the perimeter that got defined by the thick walls, which were actually used as storage for those bricks. And we eventually made them into small kind of unassigned again galleries where kids can go play. They can get transformed into some kind of a play areas. So it's essentially about not doing anything or doing very little, and then trying to find a purpose to the whole place. Next. So these are the edge conditions. Next. Now this is how the place has, see, this whole, I think this project captures the essence of what I'm talking about, having a neutral kind of spaces, having a neutral kind of form, having impermanent, functions assigned to the spaces, rather than customizing spaces for a particular function. This is an international competition we won. We hope one day to do it, because at this point of time, they are stuck with acquiring the place. The city is trying to acquire from a private owner. So eventually we hope to implement this project. This is a small, a community center come school in Jharkhand. Here again, the challenge was there's very little population. There's hardly any development in the area, and people often migrate away from this place. So if you're creating a permanent social infrastructure, how do you prevent redundancy? A school that might work now may not be having enough students to function, say, from 2 years from now. Then how does one create infrastructure in these places which can take different uses depending on the contingencies? Next. The funny part was, they told us you can choose any site in a reserve forest and build it. The only condition is I'm not supposed to cut any tree that exists on the selected site, and we cannot have any boundary or a definition to the edge of the property, because it's a continuous land, the terrain continues, so you're not supposed to create any kind of it. So it was important for us to create some kind of a self-referential object which will have its own center, and otherwise it's in a huge context. There's no reference at all, except the fact that it has to have. So we tried to create a kind of a neutral kind of a structure wherein there are just 4 parallel walls, which in a way are structured in such a way that all the trees are retained, and the whole and the entire superstructure is made of steel. So if in case of any functional redundancy, you can just unbolt it and take it away. Only thing you will leave it in the landscape are these laterite walls. So they can become medical camps. It can be a school one day. It can become a medical camp the next day. Depending upon the usage, it can transform. There's nothing fixed except the fact that there is a structure, there are enclosed spaces, there are services spaces, and there are open spaces enclosed, because you also need some kind of a semblance of security, because the kids are in a forest. So other than that, it's a completely an open structure. This is it. So it doesn't have any kind of definitive form to suggest it is a school or it's something else. It's just, it can actually transform into whatever the use it could be put to. It just has covered spaces, open spaces, and the enclosed spaces. Next. This is our proposal for Mamian Cultural Center. We have another 5 finalists for the project. Here again, the challenge was, how do you guys have to remember that more often than not, we are designing in places we have never been to. We don't have any contextual understanding of it other than the literature that's provided with the brief. But of course, we are trained to look at the photographs and look at the things to kind of come to some kind of an understanding of the context. But still, it's not a substitute for actually being there. So it's such a wonderful place. I was just thinking, what if we don't build anything? But the program necessitates that you have to build something. Next. Next. We've done some research about the place and the typology of the existing structures in the area, climatically, how they respond, and how, more importantly, how easily they sit on the terrain without actually making a huge statement. Next. Yeah, we ended up creating 3 self-referential cubes that sit on the terrain. And in the kind of a relationship they build among the 3 actually is the project. Next. So everything is structured as a part of the movement. You enter from one place, move through the objects, you can enter this, and on all the spaces that are created are function neutral. Tomorrow, if today is a cultural center, if tomorrow if it needs to be transformed into something else, it can be done. So basically, you are creating an atmosphere and a spatial structure. It's made of rammed earth. Next. Right. So this is, I think, one project which has actually given us the confidence to actually, like, believe that we can kind of, like, start participating in international competitions and start competing with the best in the world. Next. The idea was to have an extension to the existing World Health Organization headquarters, done by a very famous architect, Bernard Shumi's father, Jean Shumi. And it's a wonderful building. If you see the building, you feel like, you are inadequate to even touch it, or even, like, forget about adding something. You will only destroy if you add something to it. Next. So then we start researching and found out that, like, he had made one sketch, like, which looked at the possibility of extending the building into the landscape if there is any need for an extension in the future. Next. Next. So we ended up suggesting a building which is absolutely a non-building, doesn't compete with the original building. And then, more importantly, it creates new connections to the surrounds, and the terraces become the cycling tracks and for pedestrian movement. The entire building is tucked below the ground. Yeah, these are our extensions. These are our extensions. Here again, form is insignificant. Form is neutral. It doesn't shout for attention, and also it's function neutral. Tomorrow, if something else has to happen in those structures, it can happen. This whole part is this extension. Whole base of the building. And then last, like, I just wanted to, this project, I would like to, like, show it in little detail. This is a project, a competition we won in Korea, and now it's under construction. Next. Yeah, so if like, all of us living in the cities do understand that, like, open spaces have become such a kind of a need in those, like, fastly built and so, like, dense super cities. We hardly have any open spaces left. But I always carried in my mind that, like, okay, open space as a physical amenity is important, but it's also important as a psychological amenity. For example, in Bangalore, the kind of ground which was there opposite MG Road, it may, I don't know what for kind of a function, like, it kind of houses through the year, but it's a huge psychological amenity. You come from dense back places and then move into that part of the town, then you feel a sense of openness, and then then there's a psychological contrast which all the time the mind seeks, like, other than actually, like, serving as a physical amenity as an open space. So this was Suncheon's walled city. And there was a small, like, river that kind of bypasses besides the walled city. And of course, like, the walled city is completely disintegrated and it has expanded, like, in all directions. Next. And then we started looking at like, how the open structures are structured. You please remember, this project is not about an urban project. We made it into an urban project. They were seeking to make an art platform which includes a small museum and cultural spaces. It was almost like, 7 hectares of land. And then the amount you need to build was very little, like, compared to the size of the site. So we were just thinking that, like, is it possible to actually create some kind of an urban amenity or an urban infrastructure which will kind of out kind of, like, with the necessity of an art platform now and tomorrow, like, functionally it might kind of morph into something else. But is it possible for us to create an urban infrastructure which will actually enhance the place, create more urban connections, and, like, and make it an integral part of the surrounds? So that's what is something which we framed it for ourselves, and then started looking at in the Far East, like, how open structures usually define spaces and civic structures. Next. We also looked at the what happened in Europe, how the open spaces actually structured. So pre-demolition of the area was like this. It had lots of structures, existing structures dating from early 20th century. They wanted to demolish the whole space and create this civic building. That was the idea. So then when we started looking at the importance of these voids in urban areas, and if you also study the larger context of the town, we realized that, like, creating some kind of a open space in this place will have a kind of a long-lasting effect on the city, rather than merely confining our intervention to a small building. So that led us to, like, to look at the possibilities of, like, making a park at the street level and create the actual program below. So wherein, though you're creating a kind of a museum and an art platform today, tomorrow, even if there's a functional redundancy and they no longer want to use it as that, it can take into some other civic activity without actually changing the role it is playing in the larger context. So the idea, like, we came to conclusion that we will create a park at the surface level and completely sink it and create a cloister below and all the functions. And then, since the river also flows at a lower level, the cloister is directly connected to the river. The museum is also connected to the river. And on the surface, people can just come and use it as an amenity for the park. And there will be only two, like, you have this subterranean cells which actually can grow in increments, take different forms without actually changing the basic character of it. So the idea was, we are creating an infrastructure which opens up new linkages, connects to different levels of the city, and still creates an infrastructure which doesn't have a definitive form and which can take any kind of, like, future uses if and when required. Next. So this was the basic idea, you know. So the river is here, and then you sink the whole thing, create a kind of a hidden cloister, and only those on the surface only there are two pavilions which allow you to actually go down to the actual civic space that's been created below, and it acts as a connector to different parts of it. This is the lower level part of it. Next, and this is the basic void that's been created. I feel that the necessity for this void, like, you know, completely, like, you know, outperforms the need for anything else in this city. For, like, you know, essentially, this is what the project provides for the city. It creates some kind of a void, a psychological void, which people can use it as a contrast to the dense fabric that surrounds it. We just wanted to have plantation on the top. It's completely like covered, and you just only see the white. And then you have to actually discover the spaces as you go down. Next. Next. This is what you will see from the cloister level as you look up to the city. You just have these two pavilions, which will, like, you know, act as connectors to the city. Next. This is how the pavilion brings in light and connects the. Next. Next. This is how it will be there on the surface level. And now I want you to look at, like since you have looked at these projects very fast, just like, you know, look at the principles why I was outlining in the beginning and see how they connect to the projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhu, for sharing your brilliant projects through the lens of your practice and your continued quest to evolve a neutral or the impermanent in architecture. It was such a fascinating presentation.
Thank you.
I would like to invite architects Sunitha Kondur and Bijoy Ramachandran to share their work.
Thanks, Varna and the Design United team, Clayworks, etc., for inviting us to be part of this wonderful series that you guys have initiated. Lots of really, you know, practices that we weren't aware of, both artistic as well as architectural. And it was also wonderful to see how younger younger architects have been part of these conversations, which I think is really amazing. So congratulations on your efforts. It's really intimidating to be doing this along with Madhu, whose work in a way sort of is reaching you know, something that we aspire to in the sense of this kind of a deep structure. I mean, all of the things that he spoke about, this idea of going beyond program, and really it's what Khan spoke about when he spoke about form, this idea of the nature of things that you ask, like he did in the Trenton bathhouse, or, you know, in the Dominican mother house. What is the nature of this space? And that wonderful project in Seoul, I mean, in Suncheon, where, you know, I'm sure that the courtyard wasn't part of the program, but then that becomes the heart of this project, you know, place to meet, a place for communion. So, yeah, intimidating, but also inspiring to be considered in the same company. So both Suni and I are very happy to be here. Yeah. So I'll just go through very quickly because I think we're kind of running behind. I'm going to skip that. I've also sort of taken a similar stab at this, like Madhu has, rather than going through a bunch of projects. I've just sort of tried to assimilate. And of course, I've been doing a few of these lectures over the course of this lockdown and pandemic So forgive me, I think many of you have seen all of these slides before, so please bear with me as I go through the same set of things again. But they are recurring themes in a lot of our works, meaning and memory, precedence and illusion, deep structure, context. And in context, I want to also reinforce what Madhu has just said, and the idea of senior, so community, a sort of scene producing the work. And in meaning and memory, of course, meaning, the first one, of course, is about the senses and about how images, the treachery of images, this wonderful painting by Magritte, where, we're constantly being deceived to believe that what we see is reality, when in fact we need an embodied experience of what is around us to really appreciate what it means. And so architecture too, unfortunately has now flattened out onto our screens, into our magazines, and that becomes the sense of architecture. And I think we more and more are realizing that this kind of an embodied experience is an ambition to be had in our times, in our strange times. And also the fact that meaning and memory are not sort of an abstract, that, there is no rule that says that this is the way stone is to be used, or this is the way a school is to be designed, exactly like Madhu said, that we bring to bear as creative individuals, as critical practitioners, a way to read our situations, our particular situations. In Magritte's Key of Dreams, in fact, we are that key, that we look at the horse and we remember our childhood, and we remember the horse park and the kulfi ice cream, and then that's the associative memory that then makes meaning for us in the world. And so even for young architects or young students to realize that really the work of architecture, the work of a critical practitioner, is to bring to bear your own understanding and your own baggage and your own prejudices into the work, and it becomes more meaningful because of that. Meaning and memory, Aalto doing exactly that in this wonderful wall in Finland, where he's remembering his vacations in Italy in the cold of winter, and looking out into that blue window and into the Mediterranean sky, thinking of a much better time when it's 2 degrees Celsius. So Aalto remembering and registering his fondness for Italy as the source of, both warmth, but also of inspiration. And in our work, especially the residential work, which, we don't do much of, Sunit does a lot of them. Really, these homes are not a reflection of us, they're a reflection of the people we work with, our clients, and their memories and their sort of hopes and desires. And so this house that we did for Sanjay and Jaya, which is really about that garden and about communion and about their parties and, their memory of the house that they lived in. And so it captures that essential connection, which was so important to them as a family, coming as the source of this building. Also with Hima and Siddharth's house, this idea of a cottage in the hills, or, the notion of a very crafted interior, something that Hima was really keen on, but reflecting also their very, very fine taste and sense of, of quality. This wonderful house, a house for 1,001 nights, as we call it, a house for parties, what the Shodhan house wanted to be, where Gautam and Vinuta, they have this house where it's basically a series of places where you can host events and friends. And so terraces up on the 13th and 14th floor, surveying the city and enjoying the company of friends. Also meaning coming as a direct reflection of what the project requires functionally. And so though program is essential here, the acoustic conditions of these rooms offering us the guide by which this space has been designed, this sort of articulated form coming as a response to the actual functional requirements within. So rather than a capricious or arbitrary nature, that it comes from a real understanding of what the place is going to be used for. We're also interested in precedence and illusion, and this amazing drawing by Piera della Francesca, which collapses into one frame, two scenes across time. So on the left-hand side, you see Pontius Pilate looking on the flagellation of Christ. Christ is sort of tied up onto that pole and people are whipping him. But across the centuries, there's the Duke of Urbino on the right-hand side, who was also killed by these two conspirators, on either side of him. And by making that painting with these two characters, the artist is making a connection and giving credence to the Duke of Urbino as a Christ-like figure who is now needs redemption and is the sort of, the sort of symbol of justice and freedom, like Christ was, and was sort of, taken down much too early. But by collapsing these references, one is drawing meaning from these references. And so we too, through our wonderful teachers who we've had, the mentors that we've had, we stand on the shoulders of these giants in making our work and trying to find meaning in our work, that through their lessons, through their example, that we then give credence to what we want to do. And so for us, this reaching across time, to look back and to draw from the past inspiration to give meaning and credence for our work. And so apart from our teachers, of course, the world around us offers us that opportunity of sort of gleaning information, gleaning inspiration. So trips like this, where you draw by hand, you try to register, and all of these an essential activity to try and abstract and to try and assimilate and make your own these fundamental principles, much like Madhu's wonderful work, which sort of seems to have already reached that level of clarity. And so to talk about this standing on giants, of course, we're constantly aware of what has gone beyond, before us. And like T.S. Eliot says, we're thinking about practicing both in a recognition of the pastness of things, of what has come before us, but also of its contemporaneity. So what was past, what was history, and what its presence is today, and how we operate today with the understanding of that pastness. So wonderful ideas like the idea of the mat building, where it's about democracy and freedom, but also about order and rhythm. The idea of participatory space as the essential condition of an institution where everything is about what is in between. Like that, again, like that wonderful courtyard in Madhu's project, where that's the heart of the project, that this participatory space invites you to both look and partake of community, but also to engage with your friends in intimate communion. So that's the essential condition of an institution. Form and design, Kahn's wonderful, dichotomous design process. On the one hand, form as an abstract question of what is the nature of things. And there was a wonderful lecture recently by Jaimini Mehta who talked about the Trenton bathhouse in New Jersey. And the idea that Kahn understood at the heart of this project was the idea of community, about people meeting as they come to take a dip in the pool, that it was a communal activity. And so the void, the sort of open center becomes the heart of this building, and not the shower cubicles, the toilets, the washing, the wash basins, but it's really the nothingness, the place where you would now speak to your friends, hang out while you're changing, and discuss the politics of the time. So form being the marriage of both, form and design being the marriage both of the nature of things, the fundamental question of what this project is about, but also design as a reflection of circumstance and contingency. That Kahn, and I'll show you later a project where he's marrying these two. And so I'm interested in Madhu's work, but I'm also wondering about how Madhu talks to, or how he incorporates and deals with contingency and as an essential author of the work. Deep structure is Charles Correa's wonderful term for this kind of depth charge that you get when you go to a place that you somehow recognize fundamentally that it's something ancient, but also something that you completely connect to. I think of IIM Bangalore as a place like that you go to and immediately have a sense of recognition, as if you knew this place all along. And it's some sort of a history that's been sort of brought down to you from all of our histories. The idea of going down to get water, the idea of piling up to reach the sky, that these are essential sort of endeavors that bring you back the history of all of us. And the idea of the notion of the beautiful idea, that's a wonderful sketch by Utzon, and that lovely building in Sydney, which captures both the essential nature of the geology, the geography of that particular location, these headlands that go into the harbor, and this building as an extension of one of those headlands with the clouds hovering over. And how can we come to a metaphor for that site, for that particular location, as the guiding principle for our project? And so these are ideas, of course, from the giants who we look up to, from Alison Smithson to Hertzberger to Kahn to Correa, and of course to Utzon. The third condition is the idea of deep structure and recognition. Just to go on what Correa was talking about. This is a wonderful project by Shilpa Gupta at the Kochi Biennale last year, or 2 years ago, and this room where 101 or 100 jailed poets, their poetry was pinned onto these spikes in this room, and these microphones hanging from the roof, which weren't microphones really, they were speakers. And as you passed by these speakers, you would hear whispered out of them these poems sort of read out in defiance of the censoring of these words. And so at once you are complicit in that engagement with this reactionary poetry, but you're also transported to another place and another time in a room with friends talking about the things that really concern you. So it's a sort of transportative sort of experience in Shilpa Gupta's project. And of course, all of you have seen, this project, which I keep talking about because it really was a profound experience for me and remains to be the most incredible experience, going to Akbar's tomb in Sikandra, going through these magnificent gates, one after the other, all sort of gateways to heaven, and finally down a dark corridor where there's almost no light, no sensory stimuli at all, and so you're called upon to think of all of the other senses of memory and ego, and you're called upon to think of this communion with Akbar at a metaphysical level. And in that dark chamber, something sort of changes, the whole energy is different. How can architecture do that again, to take you beyond what is the physical realm? Context, and this is where, what Madhu said, and to reiterate what Madhu said, context is both these things. And these are two paintings by Patwardhan from Bombay, a radiologist with a very, very sharp eye. And the left-hand side is the city for Patwardhan. And each of these people, the guy in the bus, the guy in the white shirt looking at the bus, the person drinking his tea, the people on the mezzanine, they're all in their little worlds, just like, Kabiru, who will come later. They're all sort of in their own trajectories, finding their own meaning. And in a sense, that's form, like Khan would say, that each of us is trying to bring to bear, like in Magritte's painting, our own understanding of the world. And that's context too. But context is also the physical condition of a place. And that wonderful painting of the Irani restaurant, where the Irani restaurant owner has become part of the furniture, also made out of marble, sitting there waiting for the emergency to pass. And there in the mirror are the life of the city that he misses. This is painted just after the emergency, but he's part of that context, completely embedded in it. This is a project by Caesar, which really captures for me, not because of only Caesar's project, but because it tells us also about the other building next to it, that the church, where we're talking about the truth, about the meaning, all of it embedded within the church. You come into the church and then, you realize what the real meaning of the world is. And so the church doesn't look at the ocean. It flattens out the landscape. It's completely devoid of any windows. It's mostly about walls, etc. And so it turns its face away from what is the most spectacular view out onto the Atlantic Ocean. But that's the nature of the building, that the real meaning of this facility is within it, whereas Caesar's wonderful building, which he made when he was 24 years old, looks out onto the ocean, a secular place for communion, really enjoying. But both these buildings valid in the way that they respond to context because of their fundamental nature. And the last thing is about Senius, the idea that it's really, we've gone past the notion of genius, the single solitary mastermind who makes the great masterpiece, to really the scene making the masterpiece, and all of us together wearing our own glasses, looking at the world differently and making meaning out of our work. And architecture is that kind of communal activity. And so as seniors, of course, we have wonderful collaborators. Varna and Design United have had Harshit sitting in the blue shirt on the left-hand side. Harshit is now, has a practice of his own. Orko, who did Ira in the striped shirt, Surabhi in blue, next to her, Anna, Srikanth, Harriet on the left. These are all wonderful collaborators who we've been lucky to have in the office, who brought, a lot of, who contributed significantly to our work. And without the team, the work is less. And of course, Suni, my wife, who we started this practice with. But also, this is a picture from NASA in 1994. There's Suni and me. We won the GSEN trophy. And so, NASA is really important because you never know what the benefits are of doing doing group work, but also that BMS was that kind of place, a place of incredible communion of people together, learning from their peers. And really that set the scene for us in understanding that it wasn't really us driving the process of things, that it was really in coming together that there was more energy and more coherence in what we were doing. Vimal Jain, who was on the right-hand side, was an integral part of this group at BMS in the 90s. He passed away in 2014. We made a foundation in his name, and in 2014 we had a wonderful event with Jyotindra Jain and Charles Courier at the Indian Institute of Science. For once, all of us were thanking Bangalore for the terrible traffic, because we got all of this time with Courier speaking about all kinds of things, an incredibly inquisitive, curious mind with a great cutting sense of humor. We announced a workshop. Everybody thought Charles Courier was doing the workshop, but he wasn't. So our tutors came to the workshop with Charles Courier masks, which Soumitra made. But it was Prashant Paul, Vijay Narnapati, Nagaraj Vastare, and Soumitra Ghosh who conducted the workshop as part of this first event. We've since had 2 workshops, at IIM Bangalore, residential workshops modeled on the Mercat Masterclass, where we've had Richard Lepastria and Peter Stutchberry with Doshi the first time, and with Prematilake and Neil McLaughlin the second time. We've also hosted, of course, after having seen Madhu's incredible work in Hyderabad, we managed to get it to Bangalore and hosted it at BIC. A wonderful exhibition. We had a panel discussion, but the exhibition was a real sort of eye-opener for students. His amazing models and clear drawings. And very recently in 2019, we hosted an evening with Doshi where we showed some clips of a picture of a film that my brother made with me, but we also invited 4 local architects to talk about the influence that Doshi's had, a wonderfully sort of moving and personal tribute to the great master. So very quickly, BIC, 7 years, 18 iterations, 27 project architects, 11 consultants, 17 contractors, 8 principal donors, and for a piddling building of 45,000 square feet. So a long gestation for this project, which in some sense, really opened our eyes in the sense of this idea of shared authorship. So what is the nature of a public building? How do you organize a mixed use program? And how do you critically respond to a particular condition that you're presented with? And in this case, of course, there is the context, but also the nature of designing by committee. And so what is a public building? And we always look back at this wonderful project that Moneo did in Murcia in the south of Spain. And it's a project that, of course, the building on the right is Moneo's building, which sits on that plaza, but it basically creates, just like the church did in the old days, it creates these places, and those things that you see on either side of the main door, they're called retables. And those retables are filled with the patrons, the angels, the sort of the divinities that look down onto this plaza and sort of give you sanction to use it. And now Moneo subverts that notion of the retable, but now sort of with people, all of us having access in this city hall, looking down onto this plaza and giving it sanction and having hegemony over public space. So the notion of gaze, the notion of power through observation, the notion of being at a place of vantage as an essential notion of what it is to be public. Also the idea of committee, and so this wonderful example of Khan's building in Medea in Pennsylvania. He did this Dominican Mother House project. He started with that plan on the left-hand side. And you can see that over the course of 2 years, Khan is slowly sort of negotiating, of course, very, very tough situations with regards to the budget of the project. He's at $5 million on the left. And as he comes to the 4th iteration on the right-hand side, it's down to 1.5 million square feet. $1.5 million. And what the drawing actually tells you is that Khan assimilates into the scheme the fundamental nature of the Dominican order, that there is no distinction like in the first scheme between the private, the spiritual, and the public, the sort of public or the communal work or the community work that the sisters did. And so as a plan, it collapses into one sort of gestalt, both the private as well as the public components of the plan, and captures in essence what the Dominican order is about. And that comes not as a master, master architect sort of thinking about it in isolation, but through these conversations with the client. And so the BIC is very similar. We started with this very dramatic scheme with a public plaza on the second floor. We had changes on the site, and these are the iterations of the plan. We had 18 of them. These are some of those iterations, starting with the centrally organized plan, moving to the right to the plan that's on the absolute right, which tells you how we've sort of moved the circulation and now finding a lot of public space within the building that then is the heart of the BIC. So there's diagrams which explain that, the section which tells you what the competition scheme was like, and now this, the building that we've designed, as a much richer notion of community and engagement as a result of that section. Varna worked with us on this, and so the building is completely sort of overtaken with this amazing landscape, which softens the sort of hard edges of the architecture and gives you incredible sort of vantages from within. So there's the sort of main driveway, the brick enclosure inside, the gardens from within this sort of communal space, shared space, and the terraces. I'm going to run real quick through this. And various kinds of places for, so really the heart of the building not being so much the sort of program, but all of this in-between space that BIC has really appropriated over the past year to create all kinds of events and exhibitions and storytelling, etc.
See, India has always survived and celebrated via frugalness, and very intelligent way of using everything to the best things. For example, this dhoti is completely half naked, no? But it is a clothing but which has a great style, and it gives you all the air and whatnot. Look at Indian clothing, how comfortable it is, more comfortable than even the Japanese, because it works with climate, etc. Now look at the turban and a dhoti, and you go to the well and you can take out that long thing and you can take a little pot and go down and bring the water, or you spread it at night, or you cover yourself. How many ways you can use it? And I think this is Indianness. Indianness is ingeniously find several ways of using the same thing very efficiently. The lota which Charles James talked so much about, I think these are all Indian. Now, that is Indian mind. Indian mind is ingenious. Indian mind says, if I can do this, can I do something else? That's where we get confused also. But they will always say 1 plus, not just 1. In everything, look at the mathematics, look at language, look at everything else. There's always something added. Now that something added is that extra joy. And I think that is where the ingenuity is seen. Music, you look at it. Why, it should be compared with jazz only, and why not like this? How is it that it's time bound? But in time bound, each gharana can sing differently. Same notes, but you can play differently. Theatre, that whole theatre with Ram Leela, you are going in a cross like this, in 4 places, you find a king here and a ordinary fellow here and a ministers here and public here, and you go in time and space over a long time. You can do it in 20 minutes, you can do it in 2 months. How come? And you are formally separate, but informally you are close by. It's not centric. The Greek theatre is centric, focused. Indian plan is not centric. The whole idea is, if it is a sustainable building, it should use everything which is available from almost west. And all this is done by the local people. This is all done. I told them, just do what you like. I gave them pieces, so they wanted, this is Amitabh Bachchan for them. So this is where you enter. Very small, inconspicuous entrance, not a royal entrance, no portico, nothing, a little courtyard. It's like a domestic entrance. And the entrance here is even like that, it's very simple. I was thinking, why should an office be like an office? Why should I not only have an office only for myself but close at 5? Why can't it become a public space? So you're talking about public and private, form versus formlessness, growth and other things, and yet it has to be a studio. And then you talk about partly above, partly below ground. All this happened. I think now you can shoot my granddaughter. Let us see my darling daughter. I had made this building by chance, the extension. That building happened because I had to make this into non-agricultural land. And so I had to find something. Yeah. So the neighbor had only curved sheets. So I said, overnight, let me make the curved sheets and make a plan. So I made a plan and I made the roof and I got my stamp. But then I said, my God, how nice this is. So always there are clues. We must be aware to use them. So you can get the sense of all these spaces. And these buildings insert into this, as if that this building is going in. It moves like this. And this is, you can see the old sample. And it's north-south. And then I get a very big garden here. Again, this is against Vastu. This is west. And this is south. So one Vastu chap came here and he saw this. He says, are you going to have some trouble? I said, no. He says, you never had any problem? I said, no. In fact, I have been successful. After a month, he comes back and says, you are right. This is where Dhirubhai Ambani's entrance is. This is Vastu. I said, why don't I make a village? And that's what I like, a tree, a garden, the steps. And that's how it began to happen. And then one day I made those arches and then became everything. And again, it has all the West products. It has China mosaic, which was never used before. It has Gaudi, it has Wright, everything is there. It is like a good food that you enjoy, which is done by the best chefs, but you are the one who is digesting this, and you have to convert that into your blood and your life. And what I do is only follow this biological order. Borrow everything and finally become yourself. And that Gandhiji's idea that, look, open the windows but see that your roof is not blown out. Your foundations have to be strong. So you have to be deep inside an Indian who is frugal, who can invent, who can take a chance, and who can starve. There is a student here from Stuttgart, who is working here, and I was talking her about Indianness, and she mentioned something very interesting. She says, Indianness is in riding in the bus or in the train. In the train, there are no windows which are closed. You are in a journey and the air is flowing all the time, everywhere, and you are partly inside and partly outside. I think that is India. And not only, but this way, physically, philosophically also. We are very ambiguous, more or less. I may come, I may not come.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Bijoy, for sharing your approach, mentors, influences, things that go beyond a traditional practice and has led to shaping your practice. Thank you very, very much for sharing this. With this, we now open our session to conversation. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce and welcome our moderators for the conversation. Ayush Gangwal, a young architect from Aurangabad, who is currently an associate architect at RMA Architects, Mumbai. He has a keen interest in architectural research and was part of the core research team for the State of Housing exhibition organized by UDRI and the Architecture Foundation. Our second moderator is architect Madhura Jamshandekar from Mumbai, who is a master's student at the Humanitarian Architecture program at Austria and an intern with Design United. She's keenly interested in writing and the performing arts. Welcome, Ayush and Madhura. With this, we'd like to open our session for conversation. Audience, we welcome your questions and we invite you to please type your questions for our architects. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Varna, for the introduction and also to the speakers for the very inspiring and extremely relevant presentations. I just have a quick point to make. As a young architect, when I browse through Google Earth images and see what heinous architecture has done to our cities and our planet, I'm almost scared to build anything. But I want to thank architect Madhusudan for showing how architecture can be invisible, hidden, veiled, or diffused. I'm very, very inspired today. Starting with the moderation session today, we have structured in three larger parts. One is reflecting on the past. Second is working in the present. And third is speculating the future. And we'll have just one question on each of these headings. I just want to start with a question to both the studios. And all three of you have worked with great masters of architecture. Can you reflect upon your time and your interaction with such great mentors, and also how have these interactions shaped your practice today?
Bijoy, you start, no?
I just finished speaking.
Yeah,
you go, Madhu. Yeah.
Oh, you reverse it, no? Reverse the order now.
Yeah, I could start.
Yeah.
So I think besides all our amazing faculty in undergrad and graduate school, I think my greatest experience was working on the Houses at Sagaponack project when we were living in New York. Not very often does one get to have one-on-one design reviews with masters like Philip Johnson and Shigeru Ban or Zaha Hadid. Just the experience of working with all these immensely talented masters and very young and upcoming talent from mostly the US, but across the world. And the other benefit was being actually on the client side. You get to learn a lot more from that. So besides being highly inspired and learning about humility in what you do and stuff, it also, I think, opened up a lot of things about how you put the importance of what the client is seeing in the process of the design and how they perceive it, So you tend to also give a lot more importance to that side of being on the other side, just than being the designer for a project. So I think that was really a lot of learning that I got from.
We've been very fortunate. I'll talk a little bit about my experience and Peter and Glenn, of course, Britt Anderson and Lindsay Johnston. Of course, we all go to the masterclass thinking of Glenn, and of course, when you go there, Glenn's wonderful, of course, but you encounter Richard, who is really a sort of sage of our time. And it's the thing about many of these great people is also that it's not so much just architecture. I mean, you just learn about life and about an approach to life, about a way to operate in the world, and that, even with Doshi, for instance, it's the time with him is really an education in sort of how you conduct yourself, with equanimity and with sort of grace. And that is hard to come by these days. I mean, your question, Ayush, about the sort of screaming voices all around us. It's tough to find people like that, who are just sort of, who have matured to a certain point, and their wisdom and their sort of grace is something that we hope to emulate. So architecture, of course, is sort of down the ladder in a way. You're looking at these people more to sort of improve your condition and your sense of the world in a way. And some of these great masters give you that. They're not just great architects; they're just wonderful people.
Thank you. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, see, just continuing with what Bijoy was telling, it's less about learning about architecture from these masters. Like, for example, when I was working with Monio, whenever I used to approach him with a question, or when I wanted to discuss whatever work I was doing, he always used to, say nothing. Honestly, he used to say nothing. You see, as someone who's seeking the feedback, I was always restless. Why is this man not saying anything? So until it reaches a stage that he has something to add to it, he will not speak. For me, it was the biggest revelation in architecture. How does one look at work when you're actually working on something? Like as a student, and I think more contextually, more as Indians, we always want affirmation of some kind from people around us for the work we do. So it's such an intrinsic part of us. And the more I was seeking, the lesser he was responsive to begin with. I used to wonder, what is this? And he always used to start from the primordial part of the project. You always go back to the root of it. You always go back and start questioning and then he realized this man is not looking at architecture as something which one does it in a spurt of a moment, as a creative kind of an act. He was more like a scientist. He was more like someone who has accumulated knowledge over a period of time, and then he's always trying to take you back in the root and trying to show you like, oh, this is where you are, and then you figure it out now. How do you go to the next step? I have never heard him saying good ever. I've never heard him saying right, never, or wrong, never. It's amazing, all the time, seeking deeper, he'll just let you do. And the only thing he always used to tell me is, be yourself. Never try to be like anyone else. You can't be. So you have to dig deep. For him, the search of architecture is about more of seeking your own self, trying to see, and then also parallelly looking at the discipline of architecture as a cumulative act. This is something which rarely in architectural school people talk about. You study history of architecture as events, but never as a discipline which has cumulatively, just like science or any other discipline. You only add a delta. You only add a small fragment to what the knowledge that already exists. So it's basically it's an accumulation of as a discipline. for me, that was also like, and then what it does to you is to start downflowing yourself as a creator and looking at like what is that possible factors and aspects that could actually change your way of looking at a project or a design. It's absolutely nothing to do with you as a personality begin. And to confuse the thing, then eventually you used to say the project has to reflect the personality of it. The difference between architecture and a building, if the project doesn't reflect the personality of the designer, it's not there. But it's not something which you consciously apply. It's something which you dig deep as a discipline, go back in time and find out the thread where it's left, and then you slowly build up over time. And another important thing I learned from it is a project doesn't start or doesn't end anywhere. It's a continuation. In the sense, every project is a kind of a search. It's a continuous search. For me, that was like completely changed my perspective about architecture. And then I started looking at things as, okay, it's less about us and it's less about like proving anything to anybody. It's more about like, seeking something you are not knowing at this point of time. So, and one more thing he always used to say is, if you know something what you're doing, then don't do it. That means it's not worth pursuing it. You're seeking something you don't know. And that's the idea of like, of seeking something like, deeper in every project. I think like, though I had a very good experience with Doshi in terms of energy, in terms of like, his unending passion for work, and then trying to look at things like, from all kinds of perspectives. The Monio's thing was more of a disciplinary kind of a thing. And I think as an architect, as a consciously trying to develop one's own skills and one's own understanding, I found Monio's approach to be much more pertinent and much more like, and that perhaps that's the reason why he's able to influence a generation of Spanish architects, Spanish architects, not by following them or following him as such in terms of style, but in terms of commitment to the discipline. I think that is something like, the other day I was saying, Sunitha, also like somehow like mentors in our country have not done it. And let's not be any like, less charitable to them about this. They have not done it. They have only enriched themselves, and rarely they have shared that kind of like, knowledge with the associates or the people who work with them. And another aspect which I learned from him was writing about architecture for yourself is as important as drawing. Initially, I was very, 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 very kind of like, resisting that idea of like, right. But then I realized that, okay, as long as you don't outline your intentions, then how do you actually like translate them into a kind of a thought process? So now, like after that experience of working with him, now writing is an integral part of our practice. We continuously write our intentions at every stage of the project, and then compare to what exactly we end up doing. So it's a parallel process that goes on. Someone like, is outlining the intentions, so that since it's a collaborative practice, it's important that we all are also aligned in a certain sense to a certain common aspects we all believe in. So it's important at the beginning of the project to kind of define those aspects which everybody automatically get aligned. Then they have the freedom to actually question it, like, and put across another proposal which kind of counters it. But then to begin with, you need something which becomes a starting point. Otherwise, how do you do in a group? How do you design in a group if you don't have anything common as a starting point? And that aspect I picked up from there is something which is helping our practice immensely now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing those very personal insights. Madhura would like to ask the second question. Madhura, please.
Ayush, I would sincerely like to thank both the studios for such an inspiring talk and giving us an insight into their practice. My question is to architect Madhusudan. Studio Made has solely based its practice on competitions. So I would like to know how these learnings from competition inform other commission projects that your studio takes up. And do you think that young architects should also include competitions as a major part, or at least like a secondary approach while they practice their architecture?
Yeah, I think like, there are like, far and few, or for that matters, for most of the time, none of built projects. So there's no question of competitions informing the built work. But yes, each competition informs what we do in the next competition. It's a kind of a continuity. There's a certain kind of like, skill sets you build in every. It's no different from build project in terms of. I'm not saying build, but designing a build project. So their process is not very different. Only thing is like, you define the parameters in case of competitions, and the client defines parameters in case of build projects. Okay, you also need to have his consent to go forward, which may not be necessarily the case in terms of competitions. But otherwise, yes, every project informs the other, and then it's a continuous process. And definitely, now that we have started implementing some of the projects, definitely the skill sets you build over a period of time makes the job simpler and simpler. Definitely they help. Definitely they help.
Thank you so much. I would ask Ayush to take over.
This question is to actually all of you. It's what do you imagine the role of the architect in the future society? And all of you have either taught or have been a part of some board member of some design studies or a part of architectural education. So how do you think the current architectural pedagogy has to respond to that future role of the architect?
Shall I go, Madhu?
Yeah.
Because I have an answer. No, I don't. I'm just kidding. Well, I think that, as part of the local university, what we've of course realized, and I guess everybody knows this, is that unfortunately in most architecture schools, you're not really prepared in a way that you engage. Once you come out of college, you're not really prepared to engage with the world in an active sort of way. Architecture school is built on the fallacy that architectural design is the work of an individual. And so most of our studio projects are done by individuals, and you have a defense where you're supposed to present this project to a group of jurors. And there is a sort of fundamental problem with that, because when you come out into the world, you realize that it isn't often, and this is also with reference to what Madhura was asking, that the competition project, of course, Madhusudan's been very fortunate to have worked with a lot of competition projects, but even competition projects, once they see the light of day, require that negotiation, which then make them real things. Like Madhu was saying, that you need to be able to have conversations with your consultants, with your contractors, with your clients. The city may throw up certain curveballs at you, and so you need to operate in the real world in an active sort of form of engagement. And schools don't prepare you sufficiently for that. And so the wonderful English architect Neil McLaughlin, the Irish architect Neil McLaughlin, talks about education as a form of practice. That if we can, in a way, not in the sense that you would just provide skills or you'd make architectural education a skill sort of development project, but that you will locate or you will make architectural education or the academic space a space which is a kind of simulacrum of the real world, where you're working often in large teams, you're responding to all kinds of stimuli. And so it's really about thinking on your feet, about assimilating information quickly, about actively engaging with that condition, and in the kind of roles that you are strong in sort of doing. So the other fallacy that the architectural education or the architectural school sort of propagate is that the great student is the great designer, that somehow the guy who tops the studio project, is the guy who, or the girl who sort of is the superstar of the college. And there are many others who, like Madhu was saying, who write very well, who have incredible sort of abilities with numbers, who are really great, people who can manage things, in large groups, who are great collaborators. None of these other skills are really recognized in architecture school, and you don't have an environment where those particular skills can be sort of, sort of taken up and improved on. And so these two conditions, this idea of a collaborative space, that academic space needs to now sort of really focus, because I think the future, and one never knows, but I think the way things are going, the notion that you would be working with a lot of people in sort of coming into the world, or engaging with the world, and the notion that, it may not be just as a designer that your role needs to sort of, that you're really required to operate at many other levels as well. And there may be other strengths that you never sort of even knew you had, because the architectural education, the environment didn't really give you that space. So I think these two conditions are the things that I think need to sort of fundamentally change in colleges.
Thank you. Architect Madhusudan, I have another question for you, and you can answer both of them together. And after this, we'll take the audience questions. The idea of detaching architecture with its program in many of your projects, like the Art Platform project or the Walled Oasis, amongst others, not only allows for repurposing and recycling of the built form, but also questions the way architecture is currently practiced. Rahul also often speaks about how any future infrastructure cannot be monofunctional and should inherently be capable of taking various forms and programs. Does this hint towards a new architectural paradigm, and how important is it in your opinion?
I don't know whether it will be a new architectural paradigm, but if you can create structures which, as Rahul was saying, that go beyond the monofunction, it will be good. But it's not necessarily one can do this at all scales, in all situations. Yes, in public projects, yes. In public projects, yes. But if somebody gives you a commission of a house, I cannot tell that, okay, I will do something function neutral, and then which can, like, future generations can adopt. Obviously not. He's like, he's looking at something. So it depends upon the project. I think the biggest problem the architecture as a profession we face in our country is our canvas is shrunk to making houses, making interiors, making farmhouses. So the typology to which we seems to work towards seems to be diminishing by the day. So unless we broaden our scope, I don't know how one do it. I have failed it miserably myself trying to do projects. When I came here, I thought I'll do only public projects, but I couldn't find one also till date. So I don't know how public projects get commissioned here, who commissions them and what are the criteria behind it, nobody knows. So as long as we don't somehow, as we move into the future, if we don't broaden our canvas and start doing projects which give you more scope to try out these aspects, doing neutral buildings, build an infrastructure which can adapt over a period of time. It's not hardly a proposition possible in the limited canvas of the work people do. If you're doing a farmhouse, or if you're doing a fancy hotel, or if you're doing something in an urban setup, it's very difficult to talk to the client about these broader issues. This is possible only in public projects, which will have a prospect of, say, 100 years or 150 years of lifetime. And most importantly, nobody actually owns it. It's very important when a project is not owned by an individual, the way he looks at project is inherently very different from when somebody is paying from his pocket. That's the reason why I always admire people who do these houses. Sunitha, I don't know how you manage, because they are so particular about what they want, and that particular might keep changing every day from one family member to the other. It's impossible to actually come to some kind of a basic conclusion and start designing it, because you are continuously catering to their needs and their demands, and which like, somehow as a way out, I have to confess, the path I have chosen to practice is not something out of choice. I have not found any better way to penetrate and get clients and do architecture. So then I thought, okay, the only assumption I came with was that I will do only public buildings. And then I realized that there are no public buildings to be designed, even if they are, I am nowhere going to get anywhere near them. So then I have this whole competition route came about as a default. Then I thought, okay, how do I still engage mentally? So seriously, I never thought of building. I never thought of ever making a project outside the country. I just thought I needed something mentally to keep myself engaged, because I don't want to lose that idealism of trying to do public projects only and do things on my terms, and do projects which gives a scope of what architecture could be broadcasted to larger audience. I thought unless we do those projects, the impact of architecture can never be this. What is the point in doing a house, that be beautiful house in the world, but then it makes nothing, it doesn't have any impact on the people otherwise, other than the users of the building. So this is what I thought was very different in Spain, where a Monio was competing to get projects. Every architect does, even after getting a pitch curve, he is competing and losing competitions. You can't imagine something like that in India. So I just thought that, okay, it's the fairest way one can compete. And then always the best, relatively the better ones get selected. So I thought I should pursue that. And when I came here, what I was in for a shock. Neither there was a competition. If there is one, it's already given to somebody. It's a competition, is a sham. They just run the process and waste our time and resources. So you asked me a question in the beginning, whether I recommend anybody this process unless they also go through this default route. No, I don't know. Maybe they can do some competitions and also do some projects, but exclusively working on the competition is taking a suicidal route.
Thank you. Madhura?
Thank you so much. Now I'm going to thank all the attendees for their input. However, due to time crunch, we are only going to take one question, but all the other questions will be posted on Instagram. So don't forget to check it out.
This question is from an anonymous attendee. As an architect, and I don't know for whom it is, so I think both of you can answer. As an architect, how do you hold on to your initial design approaches towards the end of the project? Do you find it difficult to hold on to the initial ideas, or adapt yourself, or adapt your ideas, and how do you go about it?
I think in my case, it's much easier because I'm not answerable to anybody while doing the whole process. So in all cases, our objective is to hold on to the initial impulse, initial ideas. But I think Bijoy might have a different take on this.
Well, I think, I don't know what, of course, we have this romance and we're part of a book that's coming out soon, which celebrates the unbuilt work, And somehow there is this romance that, if only architects were left to themselves, that we would have amazing, amazing architecture all over the world. That if clients just allowed architects to do their work, that's, and it's really the clients and the consultants and those idiot contractors who compromise our work. And I think that's a fundamental problem. I think to get into practice and to believe that is to have no hope at all, to be absolutely, pessimistic about the process. And the great sort of eye-opener for me was this wonderful book that Michael Merrill, released on Khan's Dominican Mother House. And it takes 2 years, and I showed you some images of it, but it takes 2 years for Khan to assimilate the information that the client is telling him about the budget. He's understanding the site over the course of those 2 years. He's understanding the core nature of the Dominican order across those 2 years. Khan doesn't come to it with a diagram that is in a way correct, that captures essentially what the project is about, because the initial diagram and the final project are nothing like each other. And that comes through this process of assimilating information. Of course, Khan is the great master. He assimilates this information and is coming to a profound and sublime conclusion. That's not true for most of us architects, but that is also not to discount the value of the client's information, the value of understanding the site. And sometimes we don't get that when we first meet the client. We don't understand what his ambitions are. And it is, Khan used to say that, unlike Giotto, the great artist, we can't draw our cannons with square wheels, we have to make them round. Giotto talks about square wheels because he says that war is futile. And so he's making a political comment out of it. Whereas Khan's got to make the damn thing run, he's got to make it work. And so I think this notion that somehow students, and this is again the same thing that I was talking about, so somehow you have this belief that from the void, you will get the amazing idea, and that the client is now here to screw it up, with his ideas, with his, he's not aware, he's not traveled. And so many architects come to the table saying that we want to educate our clients. And I think that's just a stupid way to practice, that you would be so presumptuous to believe that there is nothing to be had from conversation. Even a great architect like Khan needs conversation to then fine tune what he then produces at the end.
I think it makes the ideas more inclusive, and then I think if you have a kind of an informed conversation, I think it only enriches. Absolutely.
I think it's a very delicate balance. You need to kind of infuse the client's personalities as well, and that's what I think makes each project what it becomes. Besides our own ideas of design and how we represent our work, I think it gets even more specific when you kind of bring the client's input into it and asks for that real conversation between the two. I don't think it's one-sided at all. And I think best projects come with enriching conversations all the time.
Just a clarification. I mean, of course, like Madhusudan already said, not all clients come to this conversation with that sort of wonderful, profound wisdom and sense of the world and a sense of sort of no ego. And that's a difficult thing as well, because not only do architects have a very large ego and want to sort of, put an imprint in the world, a lot of clients too are having the same sort of challenge, and so it's very rare actually where you get the client and the architect really having a conversation about what is meaningful. And we are striving for that through our work, that we bring to the table, what is really important here, And that's why I think, Madhu's wonderful project in Seoul is a great lesson in that, because he has put into that project something that the client never asked for, And that's what, when Khan's sitting in his office working on this mother house, he works like all of us, putting out all of the program, he's writing out, he's making little block diagrams of all the program, but constantly on the other side, he's thinking, what is the nature of a monastery? What is essentially the quality of this monastery? And it's all beyond the rooms and the chapel and the library. It's something else, no? It's apart from that.
Yeah, that reminds me of the designs we were reviewing with Philip Johnson, his very modest 2,400 square foot design. And the only thing that my boss, who was his client for the project, was concerned, we had like 3 meetings trying to work the plan of the kitchen out. It's like, what is so important? The client, for them, is like that kitchen that has to work absolutely the best way that he can use it, and that becomes the core need from the client's perspective. But then you think about Philip Johnson, and how much effort he's putting into the design of this simple kitchen. And, the perspectives are so different. So you have to learn to respect that. But I think it's interesting, like how you look at each project.
And or you have to be like Doshi, who can engage with the client on everything other than what possible. Discussed at that point of time.
Yeah.
So at least you need to have that skill. He can actually take you on a tangent and discuss everything and obfuscate what is to be discussed at that meeting, so that he can still think over it.
You know, he told us when we were making the second film, he said that after 6 months, the client should forget why he hired you. that's the objective. He's like, why do I have this guy?
Yeah.
It's like not everybody will have that skill, that engaging skill and skill to kind of like, engage people at different levels.
Yeah.
It's an amazing skill he has.
But like you were saying, for doing homes, it's also like it's such a, you are so involved with the people that you're working with, at least for the interior projects that we do for homes. It's like you know them so intimately, and hopefully, like, at least in our case, most of them are really good friends. So it turns out to be a good experience, but it could go the other way as well. But because it's
but I
so
think
personal.
time is also one thing, like, like not spoken often, that how long you get to kind of engage with the client.
Yeah.
How long, like, the project conception happens. If he comes on a Monday and like wants a plan on a Friday, I don't know what kind of an engagement can happen. So it's also important that, like, the timelines and, like, how do you actually make the client work to each architect also has their own rhythm of work. Sometimes some people can work fast, some people take a lot of time to put pencil to paper, and some people, like, never put pencil to paper, like, unless it's finalized in some sense in their minds. So, like, it's very difficult to offer any kind of one way of doing it. I think each one of us have to figure it out depending on the client, depending on the situation. And the best advice is never listen to anybody. Find your own way.
Find your own path. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm sure we all have learned a lot today. Over to Miss Varna and Kavindu.
Thanks, Bijoy and Sunitha, Hundredhands, for sharing your wonderful approach that is extremely collaborative. The value of mentors to you, your practice, for sharing your beautiful architecture. Thanks to Madhu, studio mate, for pushing boundaries in architecture through your incredible work. More importantly, to all three incredible architects for sharing your personal insights, stories, experiences that have shaped your work and practice. It's just been so inspiring. We don't want it to end. I would also like to thank our wonderful moderators for this evening, Ayush and Madhura. Thank you for the audience for sharing your questions, and also Clayworks and DU team. Thanks again. Have a lovely evening.